All right, welcome back to the Vietnam War. This is part 4. We were diving into why there was so much opposition to the Vietnam War. And we're getting into a little thing called the Pentagon Papers, which were published in 1971. Now, this was a top secret document, and the Pentagon Papers concluded that the Vietnam War and the reasons behind the Vietnam War, why we went to war, were all lies. That there were lies on top of lies on top of lies. So let's talk about this really quickly. So the Vietnam War began, not the Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers began in 1967 under the instructions of Robert McNamara. And Robert McNamara said he began to kind of develop doubts about the war and our role in it. And so he ordered the the Defense Department, to write a top secret document explaining the U.S. involvement with the Vietnam War from like 1945 to 1967. What they produced was a 7,000-page history paper. A 7,000-page history paper. Imagine assigning that. And what they concluded was, hang on. So it was top secret, obviously, and so no one knew about it. And he told the people that were writing it, listen, this is top secret. No one's going to read this but me. Just don't hold back. Tell me exactly what it is, right? So telling them that even though it's a government document, if it says bad things about the government, don't worry about it. No one's going to see it but me, right? Tell me the truth. What's really going on? And so they concluded that the American military strategy had not worked. It had never worked, and it will never work if it continues. And that every president from Johnson on had lied about what they were trying to do in the war, and these lies were to cover up bad policies that they knew were bad. Right? So this is a top secret document that concludes, let me kind of summarize this once again for us. Pentagon Papers, a top secret document that says straight up, America is lying about Vietnam. We know we're going to lose. We're just doing it so we don't look bad. We're sending soldiers into harm's way for a war we know we're going to lose. And we're lying about it, and every president has lied about it. Now, one of the people in charge, so when McNamara gets this back, a 7,000-page document, he's like, wow, I'm not going to read a 7,000-page document. So the document is kind of staffed out to people to read it and to report back to McNamara about what the document is like. And so one of those people assigned to read this thing is a guy named Daniel Ellsberg. Now, Ellsberg is like Captain America before this. He is one of the best and brightest in military intelligence. He bleeds red, white, and blue. I could not make up his resume if I tried to, right? Very true American. But what he reads in the Pentagon Papers causes Ellsberg to turn away from America in this policy. Not to make him un-American, but to really change his opinion about America. What he learns, for example, is that the war aims, the goals of the war was said straight up what we said, what America says, 10% about helping the South Vietnamese people, 20% about that whole keeping China out of the war thing, and then 70% keeping America from looking humiliated. That's the war games. And then, of course, he read all about the lying, a long pattern of presidential lying. Truman was lying when he was funding the French, that he knew that he was fighting against a movement that was popular and that people wanted to be liberated from the French. Eisenhower was lying when he said that the elections were going to be legitimate. They were not legitimate elections. Kennedy was lying when he said that only military advisors were going to be necessary. Kennedy knew there was going to be troops on the ground, right? Everybody lied, but Johnson lied the most. The most damning of all, the paper said, was from the war's onset, Lyndon Johnson had lied and lied continuously. He'd been lying when he talked about the war's goals. He was lying when he was talking about the war's progress. He lied and lied and lied. And for Ellsberg, all this pattern of presidential lying and the real motivations of the war being hidden made it seem like the U.S. was the bad guy here. And he believed that the people need to know about this. The United States people, Americans, need to know that their government has been lying to them. And so, starting in 1969, Ellsberg starts smuggling the documents out. He would sneak them into a briefcase. Remember, this is a 7,000-page document, so you don't just grab the 7,000-page document and be like, I'm just going to take this home for some light reading. So little by little, he starts smuggling pages into his briefcase, walking them out, and then going to buying a photocopy machine, and then he and his family, his kids, stay up all night making copies of them. Sometimes 10 copies of the same thing, and then smuggling those volumes back into work and continuing. So he does this for months. Now, he doesn't want to go to prison. Like, he knows what America is doing is wrong, but he also knows that stealing top secret documents is also wrong, right? So he wants to get this out publicly, but he wants to do so legally if possible. And so he goes to a couple of senators and kind of quietly under the table says, listen, I've got some stuff. It says that America has been lying about the Vietnam War. I think the American people should know about this. What do you think? Can we get it out there? He tries for 2 years to get them out legally, and everyone says, no way. There's no way that people can know about this. This is a huge secret. You've got to keep this quiet. But this bothered him. He thought the public really had a right to know about the contents of the Pentagon Papers. And so finally, he decided to leak the papers to the New York Times. Now, the New York Times found the papers so sensitive that they actually took the operation out of the building. They wouldn't be caught in the building with the Pentagon Papers. So they rented office space across the street, like in a Hilton, and read the papers there in the Hilton. And they were shocked, obviously, by what they were reading. This is the United States military admitting that it's lying to the American people, and again, putting soldiers in harm's way for a lie. So they had this obvious legal question, right? Should we publish this? They met with lawyers, but ultimately they decided that on June 13th, 1971, they would publish the Pentagon Papers. Now, by this time, a new president is Richard Nixon, and he goes to the court to get a federal injunction banning any further release of the Pentagon Papers. And we'll talk about in one of the other videos why Nixon takes this so very personally, but he absolutely does, even though the Pentagon Papers really are not about Nixon. And then Nixon sends his goons to try to discover who is leaking these papers. Finally discovers that it's Ellsberg, and Ellsberg and his wife become fugitives. They go on the run, moving from hotel to hotel, using cash, using fake names, try not to get discovered. But while he is on the run, he also made more copies and sent more of them out. He sent another copy to the Washington Post, which is what the movie The Post is about. This was kind of a fail-safe in case the New York Times got scared and decided not to run these papers. But by the time the papers got to the Post, they were already getting huge public exposure. I mean, they were in the Times for several months, and the nightly news anchors just would take the New York Times and read sections of the Pentagon Papers. just read publicly. So the government is trying to control the information, and this was a fundamental challenge, right, between the federal government and the media. Does the media have a right to report things that make the federal government look bad? Even though if what they're reporting is absolutely true, is it legal for them? And so this fight goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The New York Times and Company versus the United States of America. At the end of the same month that the Times started running the articles, the case New York Times and Company versus the United States of America went to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled 6-3 that the New York Times did, in fact, have a right to publish the papers. A couple of justices dissented, trying to protect the administration, but it wasn't enough. As soon as the court rules, the Times starts publishing the rest of the Pentagon Papers, and it deals a crippling blow to Nixon. But by that time, the damage has already been done, right? The American people have already seen the Pentagon Papers, and they had done what they needed to do. By 1971, 2/3 of the American people were against the Vietnam War. Now, the war didn't end for just over another year, when Nixon decided that his political future rested on getting out of Vietnam. Because of the course of the events discussed today, the entire American public was against this thing. Oops. Sorry, I changed slides by accident, but I'll just put this little map on here and wrap this up. Ellsberg succeeded in doing what he set out to do, which is to make the American people aware of the government's secrecy in this war, the government's lying in this war, and the public opinion swerving so harshly against the Vietnam War forced Nixon to basically end the war, even though it meant that America was absolutely going to lose it. Now, for Ellsberg, he became a personal target of Richard Nixon, and as we will see in the next series of videos on the Nixon administration, being a personal target of Nixon is not a good thing. But for now, this will end the Vietnam War. Let's see if there's any other